Growing up, my older brother Ethan was always the golden child. He was the pride of the family, the one who could do no wrong, even when he clearly did. My parents constantly bragged about his accomplishments while brushing aside his flaws as if they didn't exist. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one, the one who quietly worked hard and cleaned up his messes. I learned to live with it, but that didn't mean it didn't sting. Fast forward to the present, and I was planning the biggest day of my life, my wedding. I had always dreamed of a simple but elegant ceremony surrounded by people who loved and supported me. My fiancé, Jake, was everything I could have hoped for, kind, supportive, and endlessly patient. We were excited, even as the stress of wedding planning started to pile up. But Ethan, as always, found a way to make things about him. At first it was small things. He would make little comments about my choices, like the venue being too low-key or the guest list being disappointingly short. He would laugh it off, claiming he was just joking, but the jabs always landed. I brushed it off, determined not to let him get under my skin. After all, this day wasn't about him. Or so I thought. The first real red flag came during a family dinner about 2 months before the wedding. My parents, Ethan, and I were discussing logistics when Ethan casually dropped a bombshell. "You know," he said, swirling his wine glass, "if you wanted a real wedding, you could have just asked me to help. I could have planned something way better than this." I froze, staring at him. My parents, of course, laughed and agreed with him. "Ethan has such great taste," my mom said, giving me that familiar condescending smile. "He could have helped you make it more sophisticated." Jake squeezed my hand under the table, a silent reminder to keep calm. I forced a smile and replied, "Thanks, Ethan, but Jake and I are happy with our plans. It's our wedding after all." Ethan smirked. "Sure, but don't come crying to me when it turns out mediocre." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur, but the seed of doubt had been planted. I couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan wasn't just being his usual self, he was up to something. Things escalated a few weeks later when I found out Ethan had been reaching out to my wedding vendors. Without telling me, he had called my florist, my caterer, and even my dressmaker, giving them suggestions on how to improve things. When I confronted him, he acted like it was no big deal. "I was just helping," he said with a shrug. "You'll thank me later." "Helping?" I snapped. "By undermining every decision I made? This is my wedding, Ethan, not yours." He rolled his eyes. "Relax, it's not like I changed anything. I just gave them a few tips." I couldn't believe his audacity. It took hours to undo the chaos he had caused, and even then, I was left feeling on edge. What else was he doing behind my back? The final straw came 2 weeks before the wedding when I got a call from Jake. He sounded furious. "Did you know Ethan's been talking to my best man?" Jake asked. "What? No. Why?" "Apparently, Ethan's been telling him you're having second thoughts about the wedding. That you're only going through with it because of family pressure." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. "That's not true. Why would he say that?" "I don't know," Jake said, his voice tight. "But it's starting to cause problems. My best man's been acting weird around me ever since Ethan called him. It's like he doesn't trust me anymore." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ethan wasn't just meddling, he was actively trying to sabotage my wedding. But why? What could he possibly gain from ruining the happiest day of my life? I decided enough was enough. I called Ethan and told him in no uncertain terms that he needed to back off. "You don't get to interfere in my life anymore," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "If you can't support me, then don't bother coming to the wedding." He laughed, as if I had just told the funniest joke in the world. "Oh, come on, you're not serious?" "Dead serious," I said. "This is my wedding, Ethan. Not yours. Stay out of it." For the first time, he didn't have a clever comeback. He just muttered something under his breath and hung up. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought he'd finally back off and let me enjoy my wedding in peace. But Ethan wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. What I didn't know at the time was that Ethan had one last trick up his sleeve, something so outrageous, so cruel, that it would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about him. And the worst part? I didn't see it coming. I wish I could say Ethan's antics ended with that call. For a brief moment, it seemed like he had taken my words to heart. He didn't reach out to me, Jake, or any of the vendors in the week following our confrontation. I finally felt like I could breathe again, focusing on the final touches for the wedding. But deep down, I knew it was too good to be true. The real chaos started at my bachelorette party. It was a low-key night with just a few close friends, exactly what I wanted. We were enjoying some drinks and laughing about old memories when one of my friends, Sarah, mentioned something that made me freeze. "By the way," she said casually, "is your brother coming to the wedding after all?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Of course he's coming." "Why wouldn't he?" Sarah hesitated, clearly realizing she'd stepped into something. "Well, it's just he told me he might not. He said there's been a lot of drama between you two." My stomach sank. "Wait, Ethan told you that?" "When?" "Last week," Sarah said. "He called me out of the blue. I thought it was a little weird since we've never really talked before. He said he wanted to make sure you were okay because you seemed stressed about the wedding." The pieces started clicking together. Ethan wasn't just meddling with the vendors or Jake's best man, he was trying to sway my friends too. I pressed Sarah for more details, and she reluctantly admitted that Ethan had hinted at some vague issues between Jake and me. He hadn't outright said anything, but his tone had been enough to plant seeds of doubt. It wasn't just Sarah. Over the next few days, I found out Ethan had contacted multiple people in my inner circle, each time spinning a slightly different story. To one friend, he'd implied Jake was having cold feet. To another, he'd suggested that I was overwhelmed and regretting the whole thing. I was livid. Not only was he undermining my relationship, but he was also trying to turn the people closest to me against me. I confronted him again, this time in person. I showed up at his apartment unannounced, ready to let him have it. "Ethan, what the hell is wrong with you?" I demanded the moment he opened the door. He looked genuinely surprised to see me. "Wow, hello to you too. What's this about?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "I know you've been talking to my friends, spreading lies about Jake and me." His expression shifted into something colder, more calculated. "I'm just looking out for you. You're my sister. I care about you." "Looking out for me?" I repeated, incredulous. "By sabotaging my wedding? By trying to make people think Jake and I are falling apart?" Ethan shrugged, leaning casually against the doorframe. "If your relationship is strong, then none of this should matter, right?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're unbelievable," I said. "You're not looking out for me. You're trying to ruin this wedding because you can't stand not being the center of attention." That finally got a reaction. His smug facade cracked, and for a moment, I saw something raw and angry flash across his face. "You think you deserve this perfect day," he said, his voice low and venomous. "You think you're better than me? That you've earned this happy ending while I'm stuck picking up the pieces of my life?" I stared at him, stunned. "This isn't about me, is it? This is about you. You're jealous." He didn't deny it. Instead, he smirked and said, "Enjoy your fairy tale while it lasts." I left his apartment shaking with anger and disbelief. I couldn't understand how my own brother, the person who was supposed to be happy for me, could be so vindictive. In the days leading up to the wedding, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew Ethan wasn't done, but I didn't know what he was planning or how far he was willing to go. The night before the wedding, I got a call from one of the vendors. It was my florist, sounding flustered and apologetic.
"I'm so sorry," she said.
"But I just wanted to confirm the last-minute changes to the flower arrangements." "What changes?" I asked, my heart sinking. "Your brother called earlier and said you wanted to switch out the white roses for red ones," she explained. "I thought it was strange, but he said you were too busy to call yourself." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "No changes," I said firmly. "Please stick to the original plan." I spent the rest of the evening double-checking everything. I called the caterer, the DJ, the photographer, anyone Ethan might have tried to manipulate. Thankfully, most of them had stuck to the original instructions, but the stress of it all left me feeling drained and anxious. The morning of the wedding, I woke up determined not to let Ethan ruin my day. I told myself that whatever he had planned, I would handle it. I refused to let him take this moment away from me. But as I walked down the aisle, My heart pounding with excitement and nerves, I spotted Ethan sitting in the front row. He was smiling, but there was something unsettling about the look in his eyes, like he knew a secret no one else did. And then, just as the ceremony began, the real chaos unfolded. As I stood at the altar, facing Jake with the officiant's words barely registering in the background, my instincts screamed that something was off. Ethan's smug expression in the front row set my nerves on edge. But I forced myself to focus on the vows Jake and I were about to exchange. The ceremony was flawless, at first. The soft hum of music, the golden afternoon light streaming through the trees, and the warmth of Jake's hand in mine made everything feel perfect. For a brief moment, I let myself believe Ethan's games were over. That illusion shattered during the exchange of vows. Just as Jake began to speak, a voice called out from the back of the crowd. "Wait! Stop the wedding!" The guests turned in unison, gasping. My blood ran cold as I turned to see Ethan standing, a theatrical expression of panic plastered across his face. "This wedding can't go on," he declared, stepping into the aisle with exaggerated flair, like some villain from a soap opera. Jake froze mid-sentence, his brow furrowing in confusion. I felt my jaw clench, so tightly it ached. "Ethan," I hissed, my voice low and sharp. "What are you doing?" Ignoring me, he addressed the crowd, playing the part of a concerned family member. "I'm sorry, everyone, but I can't stay silent anymore. I need to tell the truth, for her sake." My stomach churned as whispers rippled through the guests. "Ethan," I said, my voice louder and shaking with barely contained rage, "sit down." But he continued, eyes fixed on Jake. "You should know the kind of person you're marrying," Ethan said dramatically. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't say something. "Enough." Jake's voice boomed across the space, his calm demeanor cracking for the first time. "If you've got something to say, spit it out. Otherwise, sit down and stop embarrassing your sister." Ethan's bravado faltered, but only for a moment. He straightened his posture and said, "Fine. If you want the truth, here it is. Jake cheated on her." The air was sucked out of the ceremony. Gasps and murmurs erupted from the crowd, and I could feel everyone's eyes darting between me, Jake, and Ethan. I stared at Ethan, stunned into silence. I could hardly believe he'd stooped this low. Jake, however, didn't miss a beat. "That's a lie," he said firmly, his voice calm but filled with steel. "You're making this up." Ethan scoffed. "Am I? I have proof." He pulled his phone from his pocket and waved it around dramatically, like it was some kind of smoking gun. I finally found my voice. "Ethan, stop this now. Whatever you think you're doing, you're only making yourself look bad." But Ethan wasn't done. He started scrolling through his phone, muttering, "Hold on, I saved the screenshots. I'll show everyone." Before he could finish, my cousin Claire stood up. "Enough, Ethan," she said, her voice sharp and commanding. "We've all had enough of your nonsense." The crowd quieted, turning to Claire as she stepped into the aisle. She crossed her arms and fixed Ethan with a withering glare. "We all know you're lying. You've been trying to sabotage this wedding from the start. Frankly, it's pathetic." Ethan's face flushed red, and for a moment, I thought he might actually back down. But instead, he doubled down. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped. "This is about protecting her." Claire rolled her eyes. "Protecting her? Please. This is about you being bitter and jealous. Everyone here can see it." The guests started murmuring again, and I could see people nodding in agreement. My heart swelled with gratitude for Claire. Ethan looked around, realizing he was losing the crowd. His face twisted with frustration.
"Fine," he spat.
"Believe what you want, but don't come crying to me when this marriage falls apart." With that, he stormed off, leaving the venue in a swirl of drama and tension. The officiant hesitated, looking to me and Jake for direction. I took a deep breath, letting the anger and embarrassment roll off me. "Let's continue," I said firmly. The rest of the ceremony went off without another hitch. Jake's vows were heartfelt and beautiful, and when I spoke mine, I felt a renewed sense of love and determination. Ethan's tantrum had only strengthened my resolve to not let him ruin this day. As we kissed to seal our union, The crowd erupted into cheers. Despite the earlier chaos, the joy and love in the air were undeniable. But I wasn't done with Ethan. Not by a long shot. The ceremony might have ended in triumph, but Ethan's theatrics cast a long shadow over the day. As guests moved to the reception, I could see the ripple effects of his stunt. Some whispered nervously in clusters. Others avoided eye contact with me or Jake. But Claire, true to form, had already started damage control, making rounds to reassure everyone that Ethan's outburst was just that, a jealous tantrum from an attention seeker. I wasn't going to let him ruin my day. Jake and I shared our first dance, and for those precious moments, the world melted away. His arms around me, the soft melody in the background, and the love in his eyes reminded me why I was here. Ethan could try his worst, but nothing would change how I felt about Jake. But Ethan wasn't done. While Jake and I were cutting the cake, my maid of honor, Sarah, slipped me a note. "It's from Ethan," she whispered, her face tight with concern. I unfolded the paper to find a hastily scrawled message. "Meet me in the garden. Alone. You'll regret it if you don't." I sighed, the frustration bubbling to the surface. This day was supposed to be about celebrating love, not playing Ethan's games. But I couldn't ignore him. If he had more tricks up his sleeve, I needed to stop him before he caused any more damage. I excused myself and made my way to the garden. The late evening air was cool against my skin, and the string lights lining the path gave the scene an almost magical feel, if not for the growing knot in my stomach. Ethan was pacing near the fountain, his phone in hand. He looked up when he saw me, his expression a mix of defiance and desperation. "What now, Ethan?" I snapped. "Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough for one day?" He smirked, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I was trying to do you a favor, but you won't listen. So I'm going to make you listen." He shoved his phone in my face, the screen glowing with what appeared to be a series of messages. "See this? This is Jake flirting with someone else, right under your nose." I pushed his hand away, my temper flaring. "And why should I believe you? After everything you've done, why would I trust anything you say?" Ethan's face hardened. "Because it's the truth. Look at the timestamps. He was messaging her while you were planning the wedding." I glanced at the screen, my heart sinking despite myself. The messages were suggestive, filled with winks and flirty banter. The sender was named Lauren, and her profile picture showed a pretty blonde smiling coyly. "Where did you get this?" I demanded, my voice trembling. Ethan smirked again, sensing a crack in my resolve. "Let's just say I have connections. And unlike you, I'm not blinded by love. I knew Jake wasn't the saint you thought he was, but something didn't add up. The phrasing in the messages, the overly perfect screenshots, something about it all felt off. I steadied myself, refusing to let Ethan manipulate me. "You expect me to believe this without proof?" I said, narrowing my eyes. "You've faked things before, Ethan. What's stopping you from doing it now?" Ethan's confidence faltered for a split second, but he recovered quickly.
"Fine. Don't believe me."
"But when your marriage falls apart, don't say I didn't warn you." I stepped closer, my voice low and steady.
"No, Ethan."
"Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. You've done enough damage for one day. If you have real proof, you can show it to me later. But right now, I'm done playing your games." Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my tone must have convinced him otherwise. He stuffed his phone back in his pocket and stormed off, muttering under his breath. When I returned to the reception, Jake was waiting for me, concern etched on his face. "Everything okay?" he asked. I hesitated, the weight of Ethan's accusations pressing down on me. But I shook it off. "It's nothing we can't handle," I said, forcing a smile. For the rest of the evening, I tried to push Ethan's antics to the back of my mind. Jake and I danced, laughed, and celebrated with our friends and family. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. The next day, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I needed to get to the bottom of Ethan's claims. I decided to do something I never thought I'd do: hire a private investigator. If Jake had nothing to hide, the PI would find nothing. But if Ethan's claims had even a shred of truth, I needed to know. I loved Jake, but I refused to be blind to potential betrayal. As I made the call, I couldn't help but wonder, was Ethan truly the villain in this story, or had he uncovered something I wasn't ready to face? The private investigator was a last resort, a step I took reluctantly. I wasn't ready to believe Ethan, but I also couldn't ignore the gnawing doubt his claims had planted. As much as I wanted to dismiss him as an attention-seeking troublemaker, he was my brother, and I couldn't completely write him off. The investigator, a woman named Carmen, was calm and professional. She assured me she would be thorough and discreet. "You'll have answers soon enough," she said with quiet confidence. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Jake and I returned to our daily routines, still riding the high of the wedding, though I carried a weight that made it hard to fully enjoy our newlywed bliss. I didn't tell Jake about the PI. Part of me felt guilty for doubting him, but I needed to protect myself. Carmen called me 4 days later. "I've got something," she said. Her tone was measured, but I could sense an undertone of urgency. She asked me to meet her at her office. My heart was pounding as I stepped into her small, unassuming office. She motioned for me to sit, then handed me a neatly organized folder. "Everything you need to know is in here," she said. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were photos, transcripts, and screenshots. My stomach twisted as I read through the contents. The messages Ethan had shown me were real, or at least some of them were. Jake had been messaging someone named Lauren, though their exchanges seemed less romantic and more flirtatious in a superficial way. It wasn't an affair, but it wasn't innocent either. But then came the twist I didn't see coming. Lauren wasn't just anyone. She was someone Ethan knew. Carmen had traced her connection to my brother through social media posts and mutual friends. There were photos of them together at parties, laughing and posing like old pals. Carmen's conclusion was chilling. "It looks like Ethan orchestrated this," she said. "He may have encouraged Lauren to flirt with Jake and then used their conversations to create the illusion of something more serious. The screenshots he showed you were carefully selected to make Jake look guilty." My mind raced. Ethan had gone to extreme lengths to sabotage my marriage, crafting a narrative to make me doubt the man I loved. I felt a mixture of relief that Jake wasn't the villain Ethan painted him to be, and fury at my brother's manipulation. But there was one more bombshell. Carmen had also uncovered financial transactions between Ethan and Lauren, payments that corresponded with the timeline of their messages. He had paid her to flirt with Jake. I was furious. Ethan's stunt wasn't just petty. It was malicious. He had tried to destroy my marriage out of jealousy or some twisted need for attention. And for what? Because he couldn't stand seeing me happy? I didn't waste any time confronting him. I called Ethan and told him to meet me at a cafe near his apartment. He arrived looking smug, like he was expecting me to admit I'd seen the truth about Jake. Instead, I laid the evidence out in front of him. The photos of him with Lauren, the financial records, everything. His smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of panic. "You went through all this trouble to ruin my wedding," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "Do you have any idea how sick that is?" Ethan tried to deny it at first, claiming the evidence was circumstantial, but the cracks in his facade were obvious. Finally, he snapped. "Fine," he shouted, his face red with rage. "I did it, okay? You don't deserve the perfect life. You don't deserve Jake. You've always been the golden child, the one who gets everything while I'm stuck in your shadow." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always known Ethan struggled with insecurity, but I never imagined it would drive him to this. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You need help, Ethan. And until you get it, I don't want you in my life." His eyes widened, but I didn't give him a chance to respond. I walked out of the cafe, my heart pounding. The aftermath wasn't easy. Cutting ties with Ethan was painful, but it was necessary. I couldn't allow his toxicity to poison my marriage or my life. Jake and I sat down that evening, and I told him everything. He was hurt that I had doubted him, but he understood why I had done it. Together, we agreed to move forward, stronger than ever. As for Ethan, I heard through the family grapevine that he eventually sought therapy. I hope it helps him find peace, but I've kept my distance. Some wounds take time to heal, And trust isn't easily rebuilt. In the end, my wedding day wasn't the fairy tale I had envisioned, but it taught me a valuable lesson about resilience, love, and the importance of boundaries. Sometimes, the people we think we can trust the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest, but they don't get to define our happiness. And Jake? He proved that he was everything Ethan wasn't: loyal, kind, and unwavering in his support. Together, we've built a life that no amount of sabotage could destroy.